So let's take a look at what we got now. I can explain a little bit more about what you just watched. What I just did was got my door gap back. The doors were taken off to dismantle the doors, to look the doors over. Obviously I installed the new hinges. The old hinges were a little wonky and the door didn't hang quite correct. Driver door was worse than the passenger door, but we have the new hinges on now, so the door is going to be hanging where it belongs. One of the first lineups here is you want the bottom edge of the door, or the leading edge of the door, to line up with the edge of the rocker. So that's kind of where you want to start. That's your constant. So you want to get your door lined up with the rocker. You also want to have a nice parallel gap below your door. And obviously you want to get your top lines perfectly lined up. Now, taking a look at the quarter, here's the quarter that we will be removing, most of it. And here is our replacement quarter that is clearly not for a convertible, but will be adaptable for the convertible. There's some differences with this panel compared to what I have over here, starting with this area right here. On this car, convertible, you can see the rocker ends here, and the quarter actually comes down and has a return that lays on top of the rocker. So what we're going to have to do is measure this line here down to where the bend is going to be, and do the same on here, as well as figure out where it's going to land on this side. And I'm going to have to make a straight bend on the new rocker to then lay, or on the quarter to then lay on the rocker. Another difference is profile back here is a little different. Show you on the new quarter. This quarter comes kind of straight down to this area where the bumper goes. So we're going to need to maintain what's on the car, keeping this profile so that when the bumper goes back on, it is going to line up absolutely correct. Another thing we're going to do is these holes we're going to maintain. I'm going to strike a line 3/4 of an inch from the bottom edge of these holes using a piece of 3/4 inch tape, and that's where I'm going to make my cut all the way across. I'll maintain this the same way by putting a 3/4 inch piece of tape down this edge and cutting inside of that. Once I get down to this area, all this is going to go away. All this is going to go away, and that will help when I put the new quarter on, that it's going to go right up against the wheelhouse and be in its correct spot, right up against the trunk drop and be in its correct spot. Now the front edge, all we have is this small return here. Normally on a full quarter repair or a replacement, you'll go all the way in, the whole pillar will come out, all of this will come out. In this case, we're only coming into here. So some people like to cut them out here. I would much rather bring it in and cut it right down the middle of this guy. So here we have our quarter panel ripped off. Let's take a quick look at it. So you can see little guys, I call them fingers, that are holding on for dear life. The body filler on the outside. This is not rust repair. Bondo through rust holes is not rust repair. Got some over here. So here again, we've got a lot of little problems. This is what constitutes putting on an entire quarter panel. And going back to our quarter panel, and what I showed you earlier, just so you understand, I used one of these profile gauges after I made my tape marks, which are a good guess at that. It's hard to lay tape exactly the same twice, but when I matched this profile and this profile based on my tape, which represents where my rocker starts, the profiles matched pretty closely. These aftermarket quarters never have the sharpness in a lot of the hems. This one here is actually pretty nice, but this one here is not nearly as crisp as the original quarters. You'll find that with a lot of aftermarket panels. So back to our mess over here. This is another reason why replacing an entire quarter when doing a extensive restoration like this is the best thing to do, because cutting the entire quarter off, you can see what's hidden underneath. And as you can see, rather than spending all kinds of time trying to drill out a million pin or spot welds, all I did was grab onto that flange and ripped it right off. And we got crap metal here, just some surface rust to knock off, and of course we've got this area down here that needs some help. Now when I go to take this flange off here, I'm going to remove this entire flange. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up this area so I can see all the spot welds. And the way I do it is I take my cutoff wheel and I cut straight through the spot welds, not through the panel per se, but make a straight line, and then I break off each half of the remaining panel. I find it faster than sometimes trying to fight with, finding all the spot welds and drilling them out. This isn't an art form of any kind of precision getting old panels off. Especially in this type of restoration. So I'll just cut right through, just a nice straight line. So because we found a rotted right side wheelhouse, instead of finishing up that side, what I'm going to do now is get this large panel removed as well, just to see if the left side wheelhouse is in as bad a shape as the right side was. So, as I did before, I marked out where I want to make my cut. I've already marked the panel to see where my rocker is going to line up. Now, one other thing that can be done is once I'm going to lay my panel on, what I can do is I can cut the flange back. I can cut it right about here, flatten this out, cut most of this off, and I can lay it right on the car, because the wheel well will be what tells me kind of where the panel will lie. Then with it against the car and everything, some other points lined up where they're supposed to be, I can make the exact mark to where I got to bend my flange for the bottom of the quarter panel. I also checked my profiles, as this representing where the rocker is now, and I'm pretty close once again. Again, there can be some discrepancies in the way these panels are made, but from these points I'm relatively close. So let's get started on the left side quarter, getting it cut off. So now we have the left side quarter removed. I knew this side had already been worked on, and I kind of knew what I was going to find, and this is it. What we see here is, here we have the panel with the rivets in it, is the panel that was on the outside. This panel here is the original quarter. So when they put this skin over this, this is what was left, and this is an example of bad work, in my opinion. At least not the way I like to do things. But what we really need to be trying to achieve here is another good thing to look at here, which is kind of comical, is if you remember where I put my 3/4 tape for my guideline mark, I pulled the tape off, and I also pulled the clear coat off. It happened on the other side. I left a pile of tape there. If you look at the tape, there's paint here and there where it Ripped it off of this side. Just another example of probably not the greatest job. But that was a long time ago, and that's why the car is here for a correct job. So what we really need to do here is eliminate. There's a double panel right here. And the reason you want to eliminate that is if I leave that alone and weld my new quarter to this, there's always a chance that if it's rusting in between these two panels, it's going to rust, and then it's going to grow, and then you're going to have bubbles, and we're going to have problems. And we don't want to have problems after the car is painted. Another thing is the wheelhouse on this side is really weird looking. Not so much rotted like the other side, but definitely is not supposed to look like that. So I've already contacted my customer. We're going to get 2 outer wheelhouses to repair this as well as the other side. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue stripping these flanges and getting this more ready to start fitting the quarter panel. As you can see back here, all the factory lines are maintained. I'll definitely get rid of these. I'm curious to see what happens when I drill the rivets out. I wonder if that panel will pop off, but we definitely want to maintain this because this is where the bumper marries up to, and it's different on the replacement panels. So we're just going to leave this way. We're going to get this double panel. Like this is part of the old quarter panel. Get that all off. And another thing, while we're moving forward and we're talking about things, all these surfaces inside that normally don't get hit will all get a rust coating, like there's all kinds of rust inhibitor type products, and all of this in here, I'll coat all of that to preserve this car even longer. So that's where we're at. And next is removing all the flanges and getting this closer to being able to test fit the replacement panel. So looking at this, got the lower flange to the rocker all cleaned off. There was about a 1/4 inch glob of factory seam sealer on that, which required me to scrape off the excess and then torch off the rest before I could even see the spot welds to get to those. Now the outer liner is definitely going to be replaced. We've already placed our order to get 2 new ones, since this flange is just completely gone and would require a lot of fabrication, where getting another panel, even though the replacements are for coupes, they're not for convertibles, it's still a good starting point. Plus the quarter panels are for the coupe. So the liner and the quarter should marry pretty nicely. It's just a matter of using sections of the new panel and welding it into the existing steel where it's good. And we can get this corner addressed right away. You can see the flange on the trunk drop is all cleaned off. And then we got obviously our cut all the way around. Now this is just a single panel on this side. So at this stage, I would be able to lay my new replacement quarter over the top of this, clamp it to the car, screw it to the car, and then go in from the inside and make a scratch line along the edge of the cut. We don't want to have panel over panel or overlap when we're welding quarters in this way, because anywhere you have two pieces of metal laying over the top of each other, that is a risk of creating a moisture trap, and then obviously rust will begin to happen. So this is where this is, and once I get the quarter on, I'll also cut down the pillar, make one cut through both panels, meaning the new panel, when I cut through the new panel, or even if I use the new panel and use it as a guide, I can scribe a line with a scribe, not a marker, with a scribe, to make a nice flush, even marry up when I need to weld those together. So this is this side. This is mostly prepped. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait a few days till our liner comes in, but we can get our quarter panel test fit. So now I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning up this side, see where it takes me. So let's quickly discuss what we just watched. I took the torch, as opposed to a grinder, to just clean off all the Bondo that was over this not so great seam. Now, this is many reasons why this is bad. The main reason is, at the end of the day, this is going to be the first thing that shows up with blisters, bubbling, and everything else, because we welded little tacks to hold our outer skin to our factory skin, and then we put plastic across the top. Well, what's going to happen is moisture is going to make its way up through here. Body filler is very porous, is very moisture absorbent, and once that moisture comes through that plastic, that's when you're going to have bubbles come through, as well as these little tacks. Yes, are they holding the skin on? Of course they are, but strength-wise, this is just crap. Sorry, I'm not here to disparage anybody else's work. Somebody made a nice effort to do this, but this is the kind of thing that shows up first once this car gets out in the sun, once it gets in, you know, through the seasons, moisture gets in there. No matter where you store your car, there's always moisture in the air. Northeast Pennsylvania, we've got a lot of humidity, and that's how rust starts. And this is just a product of you're just asking for it. So what I'll do next is I'll zip all these welds off with a cutoff wheel and a grinder, and I'll get this entire outer skin knocked right off. And then I'll have to see what I have left on my original skin and try and hopefully I'll have, well, as long as these are over the top of each other and I've cut through both of them, I'll have enough left. I can maintain my, that's not one, I don't believe. That might have been filled with plastic. I believe these are the good ones. But the other side's still good, so we can always copy off of that side to make sure we have our molding holes all there. So I zipped off a few just to get started, and what I found, again, a bad practice, is these are pop rivets. Here again, if you're putting the panel on and you want to hold it in place, pop rivet it on, that's fine. The problem being is the pop rivet is through this panel, and again, moisture will make its way through the rivet hole and out the panel. As far as this leading edge, this door jamb area where these pop rivets were holding it on, this entire edge of this panel was only held on with the pop rivets. And now here you can see where I took the old panel off and the factory panel is still remaining. It's all rusty in between there. But once I ground the rivet heads off, this whole flange came right off. Again, just another bad practice for anybody who wants to try and attempt this type of job themselves. This is just, all these things are just bad ways to do this, and these are the things that will come back to haunt you if you do them. So I ground off all the welds, and there is the stripped metal that was over the top. There's some of what's left of the inner panel. Now I'll go back with a punch and I'll punch all the rivets out of there, pop them through, and then follow up by welding all the holes shut. Now here's an example of what I keep referring to as don't put panel over panel. This entire section was riveted. I mean, again, even if you're gonna go panel over panel, this is just taking that to the extreme, because what do we got inside here? Nothing but rust happening. So doing this like this is just absolutely foolish. you're just asking for trouble. Do it the right way, and you won't be doing it twice. I'm going to continue on removing the flange off of there. Going to remove the flange off of this wheelhouse. Even though I'm getting another wheelhouse, it will still give me time to start getting my new quarter panel fit. Just want to share all these little things all the rights and wrongs of these types of projects. So all the flanges are cleaned off. Now I had mentioned about this section back here and the pillar section in the front being held on with pop rivets. Well, after looking a little further, there were pop rivets holding the outside skin on along the trunk drop and along the entire wheelhouse. The only welds that were holding this panel on were those little bubblegum welds going along the top of the quarter panel. Now, down here, we have some more rust, and I'd like to attribute some of this to the way some of the previous work was done. But this is also the curb side, which in most cars over time, curb side of cars tend to rust out more so than the right side does. I guess it's some kind of strange act of science. But in my experience, that's what seems to happen. But we got ourselves all cleaned off down here. This flange on the exterior skin was merely tucked under the factory skin, which must have already rusted off but was never removed. It was just kind of laying in there and holding on basically by gravity. But regardless, we have our quarter panel off, and gonna get our liners or our wheelhouses, and possibly trunk drop if they're available. If not, I'll have to fabricate this area, fix that. But in the meantime, I'm going to start test fitting our replacement quarter panels. So here's our new quarter. Just got it holding on with one clamp. Obviously going to need some trimming. It actually lays on pretty nicely. Door gap isn't terrible, but then again, this is just kind of laying on there. It's a little high here. This is much higher than this. So what I'm going to start by doing is starting right at the edge and just cutting this top half, kind of following the contour of the quarter itself. and I just want to leave from here, from this top edge downward, as well as I'll cut this all off right along this edge, because if you remember, I left 3/4 of an inch of original metal to weld to, so this will just lay on top of what I have, and then once I have it all tight against the body, as you can see, like down there as well, the rocker area, that all has to be cut off. So I'll do all that trimming. I'll get it much closer to where it's actually going to be, and I'll put a couple screws in it to hold it in place while I wait for my trunk drop and my outer wheelhouses. So that's where we are. So I have the left side quarter skin all trimmed up. I'll show you some of the things I've done. What I did here was I split the flange on the end of the skin. I cut it down so that the weld, I'll solid weld this entire seam. Now, the panel originally went in all the way to the corner. The problem with that is, if you solid weld it into the corner, you're going to have a real tough time smoothing off the weld. So bring the weld back, or bring the cut back, weld it down the center, and you can easily sand or grind this off with a 2-inch grinder or a belt sander, which I have, and it's just much easier to get nice and smooth and clean rather than trying to get inside the corner there. The other thing I did here was I put a flange so that my panel is resting on top of the original panel. I knocked out my rivets, so I'll weld those holes back shut once I start welding. Now, right here, as I said earlier, it's bad to do panel over panel. Well, it's panel over panel right now, but it won't be when it comes time to actually weld this. What I will do when it comes time to welding, after I get my wheelhouse and after I get my trunk drop and everything else is finished and this is ready to go on, what I'll then do is I'll scribe a line, and I keep mentioning scribing as opposed to using a marker. You can use something like this, which has a very sharp point, and you just run it right along your edge, and it makes a very crisp, distinct line, as opposed to a Sharpie marker that can be inconsistent and give you a thick line, where the sharp line, that is exact, and you cut right along the edge of it, as opposed to a marker where you're cutting through the line or what have you. This is much better of a practice to do. But getting back to what I was saying, when it comes time to weld this, two things are good, actually more than two things are good about putting a flange in the panel. When you use the flanging tool, which I'll show you here once I find it. Okay, this is the flanging tool. Basic, get these pretty much anywhere. But anyway, here's our flanging head, and I went all across the lip of the existing quarter, and I put that flange in there. And one of the benefits of putting a flange in that is it actually creates a little bit of a bend in the panel. So what that's going to do is that's going to actually create a little bit more strength in the panel, so that when you weld, it's going to give it more strength, and you'll have less tendency of the panel warping and going where it wants to go, because you'll have that, I mean, you have strength here at the top, and then you have a little bit more strength here. Now, this is ready to go on. I scribe a line. I run my scribe all along the edge of this panel into the existing panel. Now what I want to do after that is I want to take this and essentially remove it. And I want to see my scribe line, and I want to go maybe 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch below it, so that when this goes back on, there's only going to be maybe 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch overlap. And what will happen there is, once you start welding, your weld will burn through both panels, and where the overlap is will all be consumed with weld, and there won't be any dry, just two flaps of panels resting against each other. It'll all be burned, and it'll end up looking like one seam. So you won't have that chance of getting that moisture and condensation and stuff getting between the metal. Plus, another benefit is when you're welding kind of in like a little bit of a cove and like a little bit of a valley, as opposed to the panels being on top of each other, not on top of each other, but against each other, butted together. This way you can lay a nice weld right inside that valley, and then when you smooth it, you're not taking all your weld away. I mean, when you weld, you still want to penetrate that you can see the weld on the inside of the panel, but this way you're laying it kind of on top of this. Just gives a better, it's much easier doing it this way than a butt weld, where you may have inconsistencies where the panels, you know, especially a panel this long where the panels butt together. I mean, this panel, the way I have it cut, isn't precisely straight. It has some, you know, dips and hills and so on. So to get two panels this long to butt together perfectly is pretty difficult. So with this, it's pretty easy to finish it off nicely. So another thing I did that I'm going to do differently on the other side is down here, I cut all this part of the existing or the new panel off. Well, after seeing what it left me with, when I go to do the other side, I'm actually going to leave this part on, remove this section on the other side, remove this section, and then I'll weld the way it's supposed to be welded here. And the other reason I'm not trimming it on the face as I had originally planned was, if I now slice it here and weld it in here, I don't have to worry so much about the face and all that extra body work that's going to have to be done. In here, it's much simpler. Weld it in here, grind it off. It's much easier to grind off, and you have much less and critical body work to have to finish off later on. Yeah, oh, one more thing I haven't looked at. Down here, if you can see from earlier, my yellow tape that I estimated where my bend would be, well, I was pretty close. And what I did there was had the panel up against when it was still overlapped, scribed it from the inside, and then I put a 3/4 inch hem going into the car that will then on the inside be plug welded into the rocker. You can see I hope you can see the bend on the inside. Right below where that wire is. So now I have this side mostly trimmed. I have the top half trimmed off, some of it. I trimmed off part of the leading edge. I got part of my rocker cut off. Actually, no, I have the hem marked on the other side. I just haven't bent it over yet. But this part of the quarter, I'm going to leave all this on just like you see it. I'll probably have to trim some of this edge off because that's just two panels flat to each other to where it meets the tail panel. So I'll end up trimming some of this off after the fact. But let me demonstrate the flanging process. It takes kind of a long time to do, and it's kind of mundane and boring to watch. But the other thing before you want to flange is this is a rough cut edge from cutting the panels. There's burrs and junk on here, plus the paint. Clean all the paint off, run some kind of grinder or zip wheel on the inside, get this nice and clean so that when you put your flanger on, it is a nice clean surface to work with, and it does just a much better job. Plus it's easier to clean the flat surface off before the flange is on. If you put the flange on, then you can end up with junk inside the little edge, and it's more difficult to get it off. So do that now. So let me do a quick demonstration of what that all looks like. Again, very, very rudimentary type practice when doing this kind of work. But for those who don't know or have never done this or just want to learn, this is why I'm making these demonstrations. So left side quarter panel, all trimmed, mocked up. Bent my return on the inside. Got my flange done. Leading edge all trimmed back. There's a little bit of trimming left to do that I'll do when it's actually getting ready to be welded on. But back here, as you can see, I left all this. Had to modify this a little bit. This will be plug welded through here. Plug welded through here, and obviously plug welded all the way around the rest of it. But this is, now I'm on the second side. I learned from the first side. That's a much better way, but this will work as well. And there's our quarter skins and what it takes to do a job like this. When my liners come in and I continue on this project, that's when the next video will happen. Subscribe to the channel to be notified when the next video comes out, as well as that'll help the DTR YouTube channel grow. So thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Tune in next time. Thanks again.